What is up, fellas? We are back. Week 13, fantasy football takeaways. This is where we go through all of our biggest reactions to the games. This past Sunday, we go through some of your dynasty trades. We got 5 of those queued up. That should make for some interesting dynasty discussion. And then we also have an early look at the waiver wire ads. Of course, we'll have you covered tomorrow for the actual list. And it is actually a pretty good week of waivers this week. So we're going to have some guys to actually dig into. The first thing that we do have to get into, though, is while it was a big week for waivers, there's a reason for that. It's because we had a crap ton of fantasy football injuries. And Danny, I'm going to go through them one by one and just kind of rattle off what the, fantasy docs and some of the other docs on Twitter have talked about. And then we can kind of go on any different direction on any of these guys. So let's start it off with Tank Dell, who broke his fibula. He's out for the season. He is going to be gone for the year. There's going to be, some waiver implications to that, but there's no real concern for 2024 in terms of what his injury is going to be. He is probably the one that I would say is the biggest loss for a lot of fantasy managers.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really sad looking at a rookie wide receiver doing what he was doing, and I mean, it's all gone. So you can move on to the next guy.
Yeah. So a number of running back injuries. We saw Ramondre Stevenson, high ankle sprain. Fantasy docs estimate that he's going to go on IR. He might be out 3 to 5 weeks, give or take. So that's obviously going to have some implications from the waiver wire. It's funny that I did the video about, mustache players for the fantasy playoffs, and then half the running backs around the NFL decided to get injured. Derrick Henry suffered a concussion in week 13. The data suggests that there's a 33% chance he will be out, or he will be back. So 66% chance that he will not play in week 14. So again, that will have some waiver wire implications, especially if you guys are need a win for this week to get into the fantasy playoffs. That guy could be huge. You know who I'm talking about. Brian Robinson, hamstring pull. He's out for the next 1 to 3 weeks, according to most fantasy doctors. So another guy that is going to have some handcuff implications on the wire. DeAndre Swift, he got bopped at the end of the game. I don't know if you saw the hit, but he got absolutely rocked by somebody on the 49ers. There's no news on the injury or whether he was fine or whatever, but it looked like a potential rib or shoulder injury. And Swift specifically has a history of shoulder injuries. So that would be concerning if that's the injury he suffered.
Real context on that. So I was watching that game live. It kind of seemed like the way he walked back to the sideline that he could have went back into the game if he wanted to, but obviously the implications there, the Eagles are getting blown out, which we'll cover that in a second. Don't you worry. We'll go through some of the takeaways on the slate, but with the Eagles in the position that they were at that point of the game, it just didn't really seem like a sense of urgency to put them back in. So that was my thought on it when I watched it.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking with DeAndre Swift is the reason we haven't heard anything about it is because it's probably not that significant, but still there would be obviously some implications there for Kenneth Gainwell. Christian Watson, hamstring pull again, his 5th hamstring pull in 2 seasons, which is crazy. He's expected to be out, 1 to 2 games. He had a great game. He had 2 touchdowns. He had, a number of points. I put a parlay on Jordan Love throwing more than 2 passing touchdowns, and also the Packers covering 5.5 points. And the final leg of that parlay was Jaden Reed to score a touchdown. And I just guessed wrong on the wide receivers that ended up scoring in that game. So that was unfortunate for me. That would have been a nice little payout. But I actually did hit one yesterday. I had a triple anytime parlay with Mike Evans scoring a touchdown, Brandon Ayuk scoring a touchdown, and then, of course, a tush push Jalen Hurts touchdown, which I thought was nice, and it ended up paying me out $350 on a $20 bet. So that one felt pretty good. But, yeah, Christian Watson out for the next couple games potentially. Same old song and dance that we've seen from him.
I mean, shout out to Christian Watson. Obviously, it sucks that he went down with the injury, but prior to that, 7 receptions, 70 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. In a league, I actually had him in my lineup. I only needed a certain amount from him and Chase combined, so I felt confident winning, but feels even nicer when you don't even need Chase and you just go out and you get the W. So thank you to Christian Watson for at least getting me the W before that happened. Now in that league, I started 1-6. I'm now 7-6 with, I think, the second most points for in the league. So things are looking bright.
Yeah, Watson's going to be an interesting discussion from both a dynasty and a redraft discussion point next year because, when he's been on the field, he's been quite good. He's been, high target earner. He's been making big plays and stuff like that. And, if you came into the season fading injury prone players, you wouldn't have ended up with any Keenan Allen. You wouldn't have ended up with any George Kittle, any Lamar Jackson. players are injury prone until they're
Christian
not. And
McCaffrey.
Christian Watson, I could see him being the type of guy that like has a, rough and tumble first 2 years in the league when it comes to injuries, but he's good when he's on the field. And then we see a year 3 breakout, which is sometimes often when wide receivers do that. But other injuries that we got to talk about, Derek Carr, I just find this funny that he's listed with 4 injuries. Derek Carr has concussion, wrist, shoulder, back injuries right now. I know it's fun because I'm connected to Saints Twitter a little bit because I'm a Bucs fan. People are mad about this contract, dude. They are really mad that they signed Derek Carr, and it serves you guys right. It serves you right for not firing Dennis Allen last year. This was a save your job signing, was go get Derek Carr, win 8 or 9 games, maybe win the NFC South and don't get fired. That's exactly why you don't keep coaches around who are dead men walking, because if you guys had just done the smart thing this year and rolled with Jameis Winston, or maybe you send a flyer out for Trey Lance or something like that and been bad, you'd be in position to get a quarterback in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, it's really unfortunate. A different way of a quad box, if you will, with Derek Carr. He's just 4 separate different injuries. It's honestly just crazy how this season has ran out for the Saints. Every week it feels like people are saying, are they good? Are they bad? And they're the most aggressively mediocre team in the league. Obviously, I mean, I'm not saying this as like diss on Derek Carr for getting hurt, but that just sums up the Saints franchise since Breeze retired. It kind of feels like, where if something can go wrong, it has to a certain degree. Do you know what I'm talking about or no?
Yeah, no, the Saints, they definitely feel like that type of team where, like, anytime there's a possibility of something going wrong, like,
It's
something
been
does.
brutal.
That's typically what
Like,
ends up happening to them.
Like when, for example, a couple years ago with Jameis Winston, like Jameis Winston literally had the reverse happen to him. And then he comes in yesterday and, has that, tip pass that ends up in Chris Olave's hands. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, are we really just going to get the Jameis Winston experience down the stretch?
I love when we get the Jameis Winston experience. As a Bucs fan who got to see it for a long time, it is really funny when it's happening to another franchise and not your own. Kenny Pickett also suffered what looked like a pretty bad ankle injury. He might be out for the season. It looks like he's going to be out for at least 3 to 4 games. Horrible for the Steelers because he was actually starting to look a little better. And if you saw him play well down the stretch without Matt Canada, you could have maybe talked yourself into this guy being like, he's our starter going into next year. And now if he's out for the year, and maybe, the Steelers missed the playoffs or something because of this, you're going to have the same exact question marks you had like middle of the season, which is like, do we need to get a quarterback next year? Or are we going to what I think is going to happen is they're going to be like, okay, we should give Kenny Pickett 1 more year and we're going to have Jacoby Brissett as our backup. And it's going to be one of those type of situations where it's like, we're just waiting for Kenny Pickett to get benched all year because the Steelers aren't going to be in a position to draft a quarterback anyway. It's just not a good situation overall for them.
I was going to say, I'm like, if they do go with a quarterback, Bo Nix, you are a Pittsburgh Steeler. I can see it now, man.
It makes sense. He would be the type of quarterback they would be like, 4-year starter, all that experience, exactly type of Kenny Pickett type of quarterback. But like you'd be replacing Kenny Pickett with Kenny Pickett. So like, why even do that? So yeah, that would definitely not make a lot of sense. And then a couple other injuries. Puka Nacua left briefly, but did return with like a rib shoulder injury. I can't remember exactly what it was. Amari Cooper also suffered a concussion. Same with Derrick Henry. He's got like a 33% chance of playing next week. And then Zach Charbonnet on Thursday suffered a knee injury. No real details about like kind of the severity of it, but it looks like Kenneth Walker was expected to be back in week 14 anyway. So it probably wouldn't be like a DJ Dallas as a waiver ad type of situation, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Okay, so let's get into the actual takeaways themselves. There was a lot of shit that went down in the NFL this week. The thing that everybody had their eyes on was the 49ers-Eagles game because the 49ers and Eagles game had a lot of playoff implications. Number one, because it was the NFC Championship rematch from last year. And number two, it might be the NFC Championship rematch from this year too, because we could definitely see these two teams meet again in the playoffs, whether it's in the divisional round of the NFC Championship. I know you have an issue with that because you're a Cowboys fan, but if I had to put money on it, I would say these are the two teams that are representing the NFC in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, we'll see right there because I feel very confident about those Philadelphia Eagles right now. But my takeaway from this week, to be quite honest, is like, is anybody in the 49ers class right now in the NFL? Like, is anybody even close?
Because what they present on offense is the most schematic advantage that any team I've honestly ever seen presents. Because not only do they have Kyle Shanahan, who knows how to take advantage of schematic advantages, you have basically like Maria was watching this game with me yesterday, and she was like, holy crap, that's such a huge advantage. Like, she doesn't know anything about football, and she was able to recognize that having a running back who is basically a wide receiver and a wide receiver who is basically a running back presents such a schematic advantage for a team that it's impossible to stop. Then you add in the fact that they have a true alpha number one wide receiver in Brandon Ayuk and one of the best tight ends in the league in George Kittle, who, by the way, also does it in the run game too, because he's that good of a blocker. So, and you have Kyle Juszczyk, who's like the most unsung hero of this offense. This offense is vastly different when Trent Williams is on the field too. The stretch of the 49ers season that we saw, Brock Purdy look a little bit mortal, and people will, use this to detract from Brock Purdy. He's like, oh, he needs the perfect situation to be elite. But at the same time, like, Trent Williams is that good. Deebo Samuel was also out for some of those games. He's that good, as is Brandon Ayuk, and Christian McCaffrey seem to be the most consistent guy in this entire offense.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I noticed right off the bat with the 49ers versus Eagles game is that the Eagles' weakness on defense is speed on the back end and is tackling at the linebacker position. That is not going to work when you play the San Francisco 49ers. You need to be covering all fucking blades of grass when you play that team, and you need to be able to tackle. How many occasions did Deebo Samuel shed one tackle and then outrun the entire Eagles defense? It was
I
remarkable.
think 3 different times he did it on all the end around and the 2 long touchdowns. Like, that's what Deebo Samuel can do. And I think it's part of the reason why, like, who's actually, like, I mean, maybe your defense is well equipped to stop the 49ers, but you guys have trouble with them every time you play them. So, like, nobody in the NFC, at least, is really equipped to stop this team. I think the only teams in the AFC that would be equipped to stop it would be like the Ravens and Browns, maybe.
Even the Browns, I struggle with. I think the Ravens schematically and player personnel would have the best chance because they are a good fundamental defense. Speed at linebacker, 2 of the better linebackers in the league. Roquan Smith, obviously one of the best. Patrick Queen, a really good year for them. And Mike McDonald is one of the best defensive minds in the league. If we're going to have a chance at seeing the 49ers maybe get slowed down, it will be happening against the Ravens because they actually play this year. But man, like, even still, trying to say that this team's going to score less than 21 points in a week is almost a lost cause at this point. Like, they're going to put up at least 21 points, and they're probably going to put up 30 to 35 points every single week.
Yeah, and it's funny because me and you play in the Tone Setters League this week, and you like at 4:00 or whatever, you're like, GG's, like, it's over. And then because I have Brock Purdy, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, and George Kittle, I've made it a bit of a game. Like, it's possible for me to win still. I think you're probably going to win because I think you still have Ridley and Travis Etienne to go. I have Jamar Chase, and I'm down like 10 points or something like that. But
you're down 12 points with
my 49ers
Chase,
mega stack was able to bring it even to a conversation is pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty crazy. So for context for the viewers, we're both 10-2. We're both, vying for a championship in that league. And I mean, we're probably going to be 2 of the highest scorers on the week outside of like Doc, who just went absolutely ballistic.
Yeah, I mean, his Dak Prescott CeeDee Lamb stack decides to just snap every single week. And I pray to God I'm not on the receiving end of that again this year because I went 13-1 last season. He destroyed me in the first round of the playoffs after I had my bye week. So I think we can move on to the next takeaway here.
One last thing.
What else you got?
One last thing on the San Francisco 49ers. I mean, they're offensively, defensively, top 5 defense, by far the number 1 offense right now with Kyle Shanahan. Like Ben Baldwin says, I do think that it's not even close. They are the best team in the NFL, and they are in a tier of their own. I don't know how you stop that team come playoff time. And I hate to say that because I might hate this team more than I hate the Philadelphia Eagles, but it just kind of seems like a foregone conclusion they're going to go all the way.
Yeah, no, I actually I looked this morning to see what the Super Bowl odds on were San Francisco, because last year at this time in week 13, I placed a bet on the Philadelphia Eagles to win the Super Bowl. But the reason I placed that bet is because Jalen Hurts got injured and the odds went down a little bit, but you're not getting any discount on San Fran winning the Super Bowl right now. They're like plus 280 or something like that to win it all, which is like pretty crazy that any team would be favored that much in a
they're that
the
good,
field
man.
versus them to win the Super Bowl is pretty insane.
Yeah, no, they're that good in my opinion. But I think we can move on to the second takeaway. And this is a clear one. If you're watching Sunday Night Football, the first thing that jumped off the page is like the Rams and the Packers are going to be making a run for the playoffs. And Jordan Love in particular in that Sunday night game, Like, what's his dynasty value at right now? Is he a top 15 quarterback? Is he right on the cusp of that? Like, where are we valuing Jordan Love? Because his last 3 games in particular, not only has he looked like a solid quarterback, he's looked like a very good one.
Yeah, so I've seen some overreactions on Jordan Love on Twitter today.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to go as far. I saw somebody tweet out like, "Is he better than Trevor Lawrence?" Like, shut the fuck up. No,
No.
he's not better than Trevor Lawrence. But I will say, Jordan Love prior to this week was not in the same tier as, say, Brock Purdy, Bryce Young, Justin Fields type of quarterbacks. There goes Danny's battery, so I'll continue going on this one. But with Jordan Love now, I think he has to be in that conversation for me. He seems like he's a really young quarterback. He actually is over 25 years old, so he's a little bit more mature than some of the guys in that tier. Like Purdy's a little bit younger than that. Fields a little bit younger than that. Bryce Young is a little bit younger than that. But I think you have to put some respect on what he's doing, because not only is he playing at a high level, and now he's starting to figure out like what he can get away with, because he has a good arm, and he's, obviously learned some things from Aaron Rodgers as well. You also have to factor in too, for his dynasty value, that his whole offense is growing with him. So the fact that Christian Watson could break out next year, or kind of already has a little bit this year. Jaden Reed, obviously great rookie season so far. Both of these 2 young tight ends have flashed, Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft. And you have Romeo Doubs, who's going to be going into his 3rd season next year or whatever too. So it's a young offense, aside from the running game, which they might address in the draft this year or address in free agency this year. The offensive play caller is good. Obviously, we know that Matt LaFleur has been a plus play caller in the NFL for a number of years now. So with Jordan Love, like, if he's going to be a developmental quarterback that's starting to kind of come to fruition, there's no real reason to think that anything's going to change anytime soon, because their situation is actually quite well set up for him to become the type of quarterback that he was billed to be coming out of Utah State. Because when I watched him, I was like, this guy's kind of Jameis Winston-y. He's going to make some bad mistakes and he's going to make some bad decisions. But if he can put it all together, then we could see the good side of Jameis Winston. That season we saw from like Carson Wentz, for example, in 2017. Like, that's what a good Jameis Winston caliber quarterback can look like. And I think that's what Jordan Love could become. So for me specifically, because I've been lower on Jordan Love, relatively speaking. Yesterday, and obviously the Thanksgiving game against Detroit was also a big time eye opener for me. So I feel pretty good about Jordan Love's dynasty value. If I was rostering him, if you guys have him, you should feel pretty good. And then we also mentioned the Rams too. Matthew Stafford looks really healthy. Puka Nacua is obviously dominant. He had a great game yesterday playing through injuries, and they scored 36 points against the Browns, which nobody has really done all year. Nobody's been able to put up that kind of point total against the Browns, especially not like the caliber of team that the Rams are. They're like kind of an average team, probably like a top 8 team in the NFC. But typically the only teams that have been able to like do anything against the Browns have been like the best of the best.
Yeah, so fun fact with Matthew Stafford in particular, since he's returned, obviously that first game back against Seattle, kind of an ugly game off the bye. First game back off that thumb injury he suffered against the Cowboys, kind of a slugfest, 17 for 31, 190, a touchdown and a pick. Last 2 games, 229 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception, 279 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. He is the type of quarterback that can elevate the play around him. We saw obviously Puka Nacua, big bounce back game. If I had to bet money right now, I think both the Rams and the Packers represent the NFC in the wild card. I do think they're 2 of the 3 wild card teams.
Yeah, I could definitely see it. They look like,
Seahawks could be too, man.
NFC, at least at the back end. I mean, I honestly wish we could punt an NFC South team into the sun to make sure both of these teams get in, because like none of us deserve to get in from the NFC South. It looks like the Falcons are in first place in that division right now, and it's fucking ugly as hell.
Yeah, so the problem with the Seahawks right now, why I mentioned that, because I think they are, in my opinion, a really good team, and they should make a playoff push. However, their schedule compared to the Rams and to the Packers, especially the Packers' schedule, rest of the season is a cakewalk. I'd be shocked if they don't make the playoffs. Like, I think like their only real toss-ups are like they play the Vikings twice, which they probably split anyways. I don't know, man. Like, I think the Seahawks are good enough to make the playoffs. I don't know necessarily if they do. Who's currently even in the 7th? The Minnesota Vikings, I also think, have a harder schedule than the Packers in their own division. Obviously, those 2 divisional games are going to basically tell who gets the 7th seed and who, goes back home. But the NFC is competitive, man. The thing is like we went into the whole offseason saying the AFC's on top, the AFC's this, the AFC's that. Like, the NFC has been in the better conference and hasn't even been particularly close this year.
It's weird because, I mean, part of it's because, like, the Bengals got fired into the sun with the Joe Burrow injury and stuff like that. It's there's been more injuries in the AFC, like obviously Aaron Rodgers, Anthony Richardson, Joe Burrow, all those type of guys going down. So that's been part of why the AFC has been worse than the NFC this year. But like you said, like the NFC, there's some decent teams at the back end of the playoff push.
For sure. And real quick, I just want to address this, Cody. If we ever say that the Niners are the easiest team to hate, that's not saying that the Eagles aren't absolutely easy to hate. When I say that, I'm basically saying like these are like super villains in my head in terms of the NFL. I hate both these teams with a passion, and if either of them could rot in eternity, I would choose to do so. So even if I say I hate the Niners slightly more than the Eagles or Eagles slightly more than the Niners, like we're talking like head and shoulders above every single other team in terms of hatred in the NFL. I had to address that because he said, as a Cowboys fan, how do you see that? No, I just hate these teams both equally as high.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure he's a Giants fan too, which is why he's probably saying that he hates the Eagles as well. But
yeah, I was just going to say part of it is seeing the one team just beat the crap out of you 3 years basically in a row.
Like, I will say, like, I've never had any problems with the Niners. I actually quite enjoy watching their offense. My team isn't competitive this year, right? So I need a team to root for, and the Niners are kind of like my bandwagon team this year. I want to see them win the Super Bowl. I'm a Brock Purdy stan. I love Brandon Ayuk. You know, Christian McCaffrey. It would really bolster his Hall of Fame resume if he won a Super Bowl too. So I would really love to see it this year for the 49ers to win.
Them or the Eagles winning the Super Bowl may just like end me. But the thing is, Niners probably will.
You guys Niners probably make the Super Bowl in the NFC. It's like, I mean, we're talking about the Rams and Packers. Like, realistically, they have a chance against the Eagles, Cowboys, and 49ers. Like maybe the Cowboys because you guys like to choke in the playoffs. But I mean, the Eagles and 49ers, I think, would take very easy care of the Rams or Packers or whatever if they had to play them. Maybe Detroit is the only other team that maybe has a chance in the NFC, but even them, I mean, you see their warts week over week on defense that they probably, and Jared Goff has like a stinker every 3 games too.
Yeah, no, for sure. So we left off Rams Packers. I mean, we could just take it away with some of the top teams in the NFL, at least coming into the year. One of the big reasons why we thought the AFC would be at the top is that the quarterback play in that conference compared to the NFC was supposed to be night and day with some of the, 8 or 9 top 10 quarterbacks in the league being in that conference. But man, the Chiefs offense is in trouble. I understand it is Patrick Mahomes, and if they get into the dance, it's still hard to bet against the best quarterback in the league. But like their weapons group is simply not at the caliber of a Super Bowl winner, in my opinion. Kelsey, clearly, in my opinion, has taken a step down this year. Doesn't have that same juice in the open field. Kind of what we were preaching going into last year. It just kind of feels like we were a year too early on Travis Kelsey because it finally looks like age is catching up to him. In terms of the wide receiver core, I mean, their best performing wide receiver only gets 75% of the routes at this current point. Rashid Rice, 8 for 64 on sub 75%. Like, what are we doing, man? Like, what are we doing? And not to mention, if current Kelsey and Rashid Rice are your top 2 wide receivers on a potential Super Bowl offense, that's not going to cut it, man, because the Eagles got Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, Dallas Scott when they're healthy. We already talked about the 49ers arsenal. The Cowboys, obviously, their weapons have been playing extremely well. And then in the AFC alone, I mean, obviously, you got the Miami Dolphins Avenger offense. You got the Ravens there. While they don't have as many weapons, Lamar Jackson in itself with his legs is a big weapon. I can't count out Mahomes.
Offense's weapons are playing a lot better lately too. Like it's Bills, I mean, if Houston somehow gets into the playoffs, their weapons. I mean, I guess without Tank Dell, that might be a problem. But regardless, I think you look at the Chiefs offense and you're like, I thought Packers plus 5.5 last night was the freest cash of all time. I was like, how the hell are the Packers 5.5 point underdogs at home in Lambeau this Chiefs team? Like, I swear to God, I don't know what the stats are on this, but like how many times have the Chiefs actually covered the spread this year? Legitimately, like
I don't think
they're probably like when they win games, they're not winning like in blowout fashion, like they're probably favored by Vegas to do. And their implied point total, it also feels like they're probably missing the mark on most of the time too.
Question right now: what do you think the Bills at Chiefs spread would be? Like, just off your take.
Do you know what it is?
I do.
Is it in Kansas City or in Buffalo?
It's in KC.
It's in Kansas City. I bet the Chiefs are favored by 4.5.
It's 2.5. I think right now, by the time professional bettors are done with that game, it's going to be either a pick 'em or a 0.5 spread. I think the Bills right now, with the urgency that they have, in my opinion, they've just been flat out playing better football. Obviously, they've gotten unlucky in the turnover luck, but I just don't think if that game goes to a shootout, which I think inherently it will with Josh Allen on the other side, that Mahomes has the arsenal to be able to compete and put up 30, 35 points in that type of setting. I don't.
Yeah, no, it's going to be challenging. I actually like, I'm really, if I said I'm rooting for the 49ers, like on the NFC side of things, like the Bills are 100% the team I'm rooting
Oh,
for on
for
the
sure.
AFC side, mainly because, I have a lot of investment in them in terms of like fantasy and best ball and like my home league. I have Josh Allen and Dalton Kincaid, but at the
Same.
same time, like they've gotten really unlucky this year. And I've seen some of the like, stats and metrics saying like what their record should be and what it actually is. Like they should be like an 8-4 team or whatever it's
Yeah.
it's supposed to be, or a 9-3 team. So they're kind of getting screwed right now, but they have like a murderer's row of Kansas City, Dallas, and Miami in week 18, but then the Chargers and Patriots mixed in there. So I'm really rooting for them to make the playoffs. And I think this, like, you have to beat the Chiefs. Like, you have to. Like, if
You
you're
have
Buffalo,
to.
you have to win this game.
If you do not win this game, then you have to win both against the Dallas Cowboys and the Miami Dolphins. And I'll tell you right
And you have to
now,
beat the Chargers and Patriots, which I don't think are difficult challenges, but like winning out against any NFL opponents in this
yeah.
league, it's like any team can win any given Sunday. So you never want to put yourself in a position where you like literally have to win your last 4 games.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think we can transition it straight to the Chargers Pats, and we'll just go off the cuff here. The Chargers Pats game and the Falcons Jets game legit set football back decades. Like, what are we doing, man? There was 27 combined points in those 2 games.
Yeah,
How?
I need an eye wash station in my office right now because after like for some reason, like I have 3 monitors here. So I
6
put
nothing.
red zone on the middle monitor, and for some reason I put Falcons Jets on my right monitor because I had Drake London and because I always like watching the Falcons because I have all the Bijan exposure in the world and I have 26% Brees Hall in my best ball team. So I put that game on my other monitor and I was like, why the hell am I watching this game when I could be watching Texans Broncos or whatever.
I
Like I
watched that.
had the Dolphins and Commanders game on my other monitor, so I was watching that game already. But yeah, just brutal football. I mean, weather played a part in both games. It was like rainy and gross, but the game was 6-0 in the Los
6
Angeles Chargers
nothing.
Patriots. Like it was 6-0.
6-0. And there's a thing on Cowboys Twitter. Obviously, you're not following it, but I am. There's a thing on Cowboys Twitter just pulling up like old Chargers tweets of like, oh, Kellen Moore coming. Imagine what he could do with a real quarterback like Justin Herbert. Everybody's just getting quote tweeted and ripped apart because of that. Like, dude, Kellen Moore is exactly who Cowboys fans said that he was. And everybody could take the L on that. Everybody can.
Yeah, we
It's
can
so
too. Like we were so excited about I
yeah.
mean, Justin Herbert's been good from like a fantasy perspective, and Keenan Allen, has been great. And Mike Williams getting hurt doesn't help their offense. Obviously, that was a big part of their offense. But yeah, it's been rough. It's been rough. And I would say one of the biggest takeaways. I mean, this is a big takeaway for every NFL season, but like you really do see what coaching means. Like coaching matters. How many times could I say coaching matters as a lesson we've learned from this season? Bryce Young, situation in Carolina, coaching matters. CJ Stroud, situation in Houston, coaching matters. Trying to think all these other teams that are like elevating their play. Indianapolis, look what the difference between Frank Reich and Shane Steichen has been. Coaching matters, and that's actually one of our takeaways. Like they have found a way to get it done. They're a 7-5 football team with a team that's basically exactly what they had last year. Like, how is it any different than what they had last year? Jonathan Taylor was banged up last year. He's banged up right now. Michael Pittman Jr. is playing better this year than he was last year, but I honestly do think it is coaching and schematic changes why he's playing so much better. Josh Downs has been great, but your starting quarterback got hurt, and your best offensive player is hurt right now too, and you're 7-5.
Yeah, no, it's remarkable. And I was actually talking about with Brock about it, and he said that the Colts roster always had like a certain level of talent where they could have been this type of team. It's been a cultural reset. Having a guy like Shane Steichen there, revamping the offense. I mean, the fact that you're again a 7-5 football team, well within the mix to make the playoffs, with Gardner Minshew as your quarterback and with your stud 4th overall pick not being able to play the rest of the season, like it just speaks volumes to the culture they have set with that Indianapolis team. They're going to be a fun watch as they progress forward, as they continue to add, offensive line help in the interior, as they continue to add help defensively, and obviously watching how Anthony Richardson transitions. Because I mean, Shane Steichen, it's been the biggest blessing to that franchise they could have ever possibly asked for.
Yeah, I honestly think that if they make the playoffs, like he should be a top 3 candidate for coach of the year.
Him and D'Amico are the top 2, in my opinion.
Exactly. Like it's been remarkable what they've been able to do. When you think about the fact that this exact, basically the same roster, same offensive line, Matt Ryan versus Gardner Minshew is a wash. Like they're not that much better this year than they were last year personnel wise. They basically have the same roster, yet they're overperforming expectations because they actually have a good coaching staff. And I think the biggest like fantasy takeaway from this situation is I feel quite confident in projecting Anthony Richardson to actually develop as a player because of this situation. If he was in the Justin Fields situation where we don't know exactly what to think of the coaching staff and the weapons and the protection and all that kind of stuff, then you have like a much riskier dynasty asset. But Richardson is on the Jalen Hurts trajectory right now. Like that's just basically what you have to take away from him, even though, it would have been nice to see him start more games this year before he got hurt. I feel confident that Shane Steichen knows how to develop him. The offensive line will stay good. The weapons group will probably get added pieces to it because, Pittman and Downs are great building blocks. Alec Pierce is a fine number 3, I suppose. Like, they could go into next year with this exact same offensive personnel. JT is re-signed those 3 top receivers, and I would feel pretty confident that Anthony Richardson has like an above average weapons group. If they just add pieces on defense and offensive line and maybe some depth, they'd actually be like a potential playoff contender, a chance to win their own division. Their division's suddenly going to be really exciting with Trevor Lawrence, CJ Stroud, and Anthony Richardson fighting it out for the top seed every year.
God, I was just going to mention that, man. This division moving forward is loaded. And I mean, it's so funny because the AFC South was the laughing stock of the AFC, the laughing stock of the NFL for how long? And now you can make the argument with CJ Stroud there, with Trevor Lawrence there, with Anthony Richardson there, and obviously,
we'll
Will
see
Levis.
What happens with Will Levis too?
He's shown flashes. I mean, you could argue from a personnel standpoint that 35-year-old DeAndre Hopkins and not much else on offense. I mean, Derrick Henry obviously going down in that game.
One of the worst pass protecting offensive lines in the league too.
And outside of DeAndre Hopkins, like, who's an above average weapon on that offense? There's nobody. And the fact that Will Levis has hung in there, taken the hits, and still been able to, deliver some wins. Like, you have to feel happy with that pick now if you're a Titans fan. So I'm really curious to see how this division ends up materializing. I would be shocked if, there wasn't 3 potential playoff contenders, and if the Tennessee Titans weren't a solid, average to slightly above average football team next year. I'm really excited.
Yeah, it could be kind of like AFC Easty, like the way that we're looking at this division, where like you got 2 really solid contenders, Jacksonville and Houston potentially, and then 2, pretty good playoff contender caliber teams with Indianapolis and Tennessee going forward. So yeah, I've been really encouraged with what I've seen. I think the biggest, dynasty takeaway has to be like, you could probably project Anthony Richardson to be a great quarterback because of the situation that he's being put in. Because I mean, how many times have we said, like, drop these young quarterbacks in a good nest to, develop and grow? And like, when you're a guy like Anthony Richardson, you were not a finished product coming out of school. You need a good situation and a good coaching staff, more importantly, to develop your skill set. And I think from what we saw from him early in the season, plus now what we're seeing from what they've done to elevate like Gardner Minshew to like a solid quarterback right now, you have to be excited about it. We can briefly touch on the Miami Dolphins offense because they're kind of like the 49ers of the AFC right now. I have tweeted it like 3 times in the last 24 hours that I don't know how the hell Tyreek Hill is not the consensus MVP favorite right now, because I know he's a wide receiver. Like, I know that's the reason why, but legitimately this guy has 10 games having scored a touchdown this season. He has 6 games of over 125 yards. How the hell is this guy not going to win MVP if he has a 2,000-yard season?
So for right off the bat, obviously he's locked up offensive player of the year. It's not even close. Like, we can address that elephant in the room. The problem with the
I think
NFL
McCaffrey's
MVP,
having a great season too, so I don't think it's not even close. But I think like Tyreek will win it for sure.
If he gets 2,000 yards, it's not even close. But
yeah,
with the MVP award, why it's so uncommon to see it is that since the year 2000, 4 non-quarterbacks have won the MVP. 1 since 2010, and that was Adrian Peterson nearly setting the rushing record. And that year, there was literally no other candidates, if I remember correctly. So he won it.
I don't think there's any quarterback candidates this year that are like, is Brock Purdy a good candidate? Is Dak Prescott a good candidate? Is Jalen Hurts a good candidate? Sure. But are any of them like far and away the best quarterback in the league this year that would dictate they win the MVP? Absolutely not. Each week we change it. I think that goes to show why there's no clear favorite at quarterback, because every week is a different guy. For the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've been saying Dak Prescott. Before that, people were talking about Josh Allen. Now people are saying Brock Purdy is the favorite for MVP.
Which is ridiculous.
It's going all over the place, though. That's my point. The one constant has been Tyreek Hill.
He's a stud, but he's not going to win it because it's a quarterback award, and by definition, they are the most valuable players on the field. I don't make the rules. The history speaks for itself. It's going to come down to, in my opinion, one of Dak, Purdy, or Hurts. I do think it comes down to it. I would be sick to my stomach for football discourse if it is Brock Purdy, because if you watched that game yesterday, how many of his 380 yards were actually air yards? 110. Like,
yeah, I mean, I'm not saying Brock Purdy should win the MVP or anything. I think that Jalen Hurts and Dak probably deserve it more, but at the same time, Like, I just think it should be Tyreek. Like, I think Tyreek is the most valuable player in the league this year. I think he is doing more for his team than even those quarterbacks are doing.
And that's why we need to have two separate awards: the most outstanding player and the most valuable player. That's all I'm saying.
That's fair. I just think it shouldn't be a quarterback award. I think it should be the most valuable player in the league. Every team could use Tyreek Hill. Every single team.
No, for sure. I will say, though, again, the needle mover there is the quarterback position is going to drive it more. That's the argument counter-wise. But I do think that if we're not going to give it to a non-quarterback this year, when are we ever going to give it to a non-quarterback?
Exactly. If Tyreek isn't going to win the MVP after going for 2,000 yards, which I think he'll do, I think he will go for 2,000 yards, then how the hell is a non-quarterback ever going to win this award again? Unless, we get a running back going for 2,300 rushing yards or some
which won't happen
crazy nonsense like that.
Which won't happen in the new NFL, like unless they're averaging 7 yards. So,
why the hell are we even calling it MVP anymore? It should be called best quarterback.
Yeah, no, I feel you. But we can move on, I think, to the next take here. And
we got two more that I want to go rapid fire on. So there was a couple running back rotations that, from a fantasy perspective, worth keeping an eye on. If you guys have Devon Achane or Raheem Mostert, we saw what happened to this backfield when Achane came back, and he led the Dolphins backfield in his first game back with 33 plays to Mostert's 20, which I thought was pretty surprising. I thought we would see more of a Mostert gets the 33 play type of workload and Achane gets the 20 play workload. But Achane, I mean, if you guys stashed him, if you traded low for him, he's probably going to be a great option rest of the season. Scores twice in that game, goes for like 100 total yards or whatever it was. He is definitely the type of dude that's going to pay off down the stretch.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like Devon Achane, like we said all week, is this guy going to get back to the workload that we saw? Is he going to get back to that weekly winning potential we saw in the first week back from injury? And not only that, like, dude, he's got to be ranked as a top 5 running back every week. That offense is too explosive. Devon Achane himself is obviously a incredible, efficient player. And the touchdown equity in this offense, like you would think that for how much they air it out, for how many yards Tyreek has, for how many yards these weapons have on the outside, like once I get down inside the 5, it's still a typical Shanahan, McDaniel, LaFleur type of system where we're giving it to our running backs. I mean, we saw just this week, Achane and Mostert combined for 3 rushing touchdowns. So it really is encouraging if you have, just feels like the obvious thing of all time. But if you have Miami Dolphins moving forward and you were maybe worried because there was a stretch there where they kind of had some down performances, don't be. Because guess what? They have some high-scoring game environments coming up. They play the Cowboys, obviously, in Week 16, where if you have a bye week and you have those, Dolphins and Cowboys, like that, the over-under on that game is going to be in the 50s. I can tell you that for free.
Yeah, it might be in the mid-50s,
yes.
Which is one that we haven't seen in a while. I wouldn't be shocked if that over-under was like 54 or 55, which is definitely would have been the highest one that we've seen all season. Another running back rotation worth monitoring. Breece Hall saw 20 opportunities and 7 targets, which is great for the Jets. But Dalvin Cook going into the game, they said he was going to get more work or something like that. And he ended up seeing 11 opportunities as well. So something to keep in mind with the Jets backfield. But Breece still got 20 opportunities, so I'm not really that concerned. And then after 4 weeks in a row of 75% or more of the snaps, Devin Singletary played 44% of the snaps for the Texans this past week. And Dameon Pierce, as I talked about on the running back tier list video, played 38% of the snaps. And Dare, for some reason, played 17%. I said it on the running back tier list that if I knew Devin Singletary was going to stay in this role 75, 80% of the snap, like he would legit be a top 12 running back rest of the season. Mm-hmm. But I figured it was Pierce's first game back in week 12. And in week 13, it was going to go back to like a rotation between Dameon Pierce and Devin Singletary. And that is literally exactly what happened. So if you guys have Devin Singletary, like great, you absorb that production. He's still a good stash for the rest of the season, but I'm probably not putting him in my lineup for the rest of the year unless Pierce gets injured again or we see a dramatic shift again.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the final takeaway we want to get into, obviously, this is more a college-based take. Both our teams, thankfully, we are able to see on Sunday morning live stream, are able to be in the college football playoff. But our takeaway is just the draft eligible guys potentially furthering or discrediting their stock in the playoffs. So the main guys that we kind of want to point to are guys like, for example, JJ McCarthy. Very polarizing player right now. People want to say, he doesn't have the passing volume, but guess what? in this game against Alabama, you are going to need to throw the football if you want to win that game. And potentially, if you do get by Alabama, you're going to need to throw the football against Washington or against Texas, whoever wins that other semifinal. So I do think J.J. McCarthy, depending on how he plays against Alabama and potentially further on, can cement himself as a first-round pick. Or potentially, if they lose to Alabama and he doesn't look like that guy, I can see him just going back to school.
Yeah, I think the college football playoff is going to be crucial for all of these quarterbacks.
Oh, yeah.
JJ McCarthy in particular, because he's the one that's getting like the first round buzz right now. Quinn Ewers for Texas, reportedly going back to school. But if he has a great college football playoff and Texas wins the national championship, maybe he'll come out for the draft, and he's going to be obviously a very toolsy, polarizing prospect as well. But if we see him sun run the rest of the season, I wouldn't be shocked if he was a first round quarterback as well. Michael Penix, same thing. I mean, people are concerned with the health with him, but again, if he wins the national championship, then people are going to be like, this is kind of undeniable. We have to, talk about this guy as a first round quarterback. And even Jalen Milroe, like, I mean, he's not going to probably come out for the draft this year, but this would further his, dynasty relevant stuff for 2025, I would assume. I don't think he would come out this year, even if he won the national championship. But those guys in particular, like, I'm really excited about, because if you think about last year, think about what the national championship or the college football playoffs did for CJ Stroud. Like, how different would the narrative have been on CJ Stroud had that Georgia game never happened? Let's say Ohio State was the 5 seed instead of the 4 seed, and CJ Stroud never has that Georgia game. Are we even talking about this guy as a top 15 pick in the NFL draft? Like, he might have slipped all the way to the back end of the first round. People were talking about him sliding in the draft without like that situation, right? The Texans took him at 2nd overall. But if he doesn't play that Georgia game, I would have for sure had legitimate question marks. Is this guy anything more than like Jared Goff? Is what I would have thought.
Yeah, and I mean, kudos to him being able to show that on display. I feel like that's maybe something we could take away from Ohio State maybe moving forward, is that with Ryan Day, I feel like they're coaching their quarterbacks to just stick in the pocket and find it out. I mean, we're kind of seeing it with Kyle McCord this year. Obviously, Kyle McCord doesn't even hold even an ounce of a candle next to CJ Stroud's name, but it feels like for the most part, it's kind of a coached in thing. And I kind of want to go on a little bit of rant here about it, because it feels like a lot of times we want to see these quarterbacks get out of structure, make plays, but at the same time, we have to involve coaching here. Because I know for a fact, for example, I hate to root everything back to the Cowboys, but same thing with Dak, where the couple years with Kellen Moore, he was taught, like, you're coming off the ankle injury, become this elite processor, stay in the pocket, don't go out of structure, like you are going to be a pocket passer. And then we see Kellen Moore leave this year. Dak Prescott midseason starts using his feet, and we see how that offense has kind of evolved. I feel like for the most part with these quarterbacks, if they show that genuine athletic talent, sometimes it's just kind of coached into them. Like, you are not supposed to be the playmaker of this offense. You're supposed to sit in structure and deliver it to the playmakers. And we kind of saw, for example, even like we said with CJ Stroud, every single game up until the Georgia game, Ryan Day felt like he needed CJ Stroud in the pocket. And then in the Georgia game, the offensive line was never going to hold up to Georgia. So now we see, hey, CJ Stroud, go make plays out of structure, go win us the game. And he almost did.
Yeah, he literally probably won them that game, especially if Harrison doesn't get hurt. And we might have been talking about CJ Stroud as the first pick in the draft for sure if they had won the national championship. Like, I think if CJ Stroud had won the national championship, he would have been the consensus QB1 for a lot of people, which is crazy because he actually did play well enough to win that game. So it really shouldn't have changed the narrative at all.
Yeah, no, it is pretty crazy looking back. And that's something I feel like I have to build into the evaluations more moving forward, because that has been a big takeaway, is that like coaching has a lot more implication about scramble percentages than we want to admit at times. Obviously, it takes the player's tendencies in its own right. But if you're coached to just stay in the pocket, deliver strikes, then sometimes these young quarterbacks aren't able to just go out and make plays.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of Dynasty, we can kind of just talk about that. And I would say that if we're looking at any quarterback to be this year's CJ Stroud, it's probably JJ McCarthy, but I think Quinn as well. Both of these guys could do something in the college football playoff that make us change the narrative around them. And Quinn, I mean, just did it in the Big 12 championship, had a monster game. But JJ specifically, he's been coached to do a certain thing in the Michigan offense, which is get the ball to Corum and Donovan Edwards and don't make mistakes. But if he has to go out there and win some games, it's going to really change the narrative, at least in my opinion, because I'm kind of like a doubter of JJ McCarthy a little bit.
I'm excited
for what his expectation is going into the NFL draft, because to me, I see a game manager with plus tools, but if we see him actually use them in a game, that'll change the narrative for sure.
Yeah, like it's remarkable to me that they don't throw the ball more to a certain point. I do think that there's an influence there with Harbaugh versus with Jerome Moore, assistant offensive line coach, offensive coordinator, running back background. That's probably why he leaned on his run game. Not to mention JJ McCarthy also hurt his knee in that Penn State game. But we're gonna find a lot more. You have Harbaugh, you have to go win the game. Let's see you go do it now. There's no excuses.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about some dynasty trades. We got 5 queued up here. Going to be some good discussions. This first one, I actually really would like to talk about this player because Ryan made this trade. He's a rebuilding team and he traded for Nick Chubb, which obviously as a rebuilder, that doesn't really make sense. But when we talked about it in our dynasty trade strategy video for Flock Fantasy, which is, still live on the site if you guys want to check that video out, one of the things that we like doing as rebuilders is buying injured players and buying players that are going to accumulate in value. A couple of years ago, we were talking about go buy Calvin Ridley. Once he's not suspended, he's going to be a guy that accumulates value. And I think Nick Chubb is a good example of this right now as well, because I mean, it was a severe injury that he suffered, a devastating injury. It's going to be something that is going to be challenging to come back from. But we've already seen Nick Chubb do it. And if anybody's going to come back and be the same guy that he was before the injury, it's going to be somebody like Nick Chubb, who, in my opinion, at least, in terms of like raw on the field production, one of the best running backs I've ever seen in my lifetime and potentially a future Hall of Famer. So Nick Chubb was acquired for Ezekiel Elliott, Tyler Higbee, Mac Jones, and Bailey Zappi. This is a league where Ryan is basically just offloading players. He is a rebuilding team. It sounds like it's a super flex as well. But Mac Jones, Bailey Zappi, Tyler Higbee, and Ezekiel Elliott, are any of those players doing really anything for you aside from, I mean, maybe Zeke because Ramondre is hurt now. But right now, like none of those players move the needle for me. I actually really like the idea of going and taking a plunge on a guy that once he's healthy, maybe can net you a late first round pick still.
Yeah, 100%. With Nick Chubb, again, you're buying against precedent, obviously, with the compound injury that he suffered. But at the same time, it's like, dude, like if he's back and healthy, it's Nick Chubb. And not to mention, you did not pay a consequential price. All the fodder that you basically gave up here, like, yeah, that guy's getting the extrinsic production value this year. But at the end of the day, if Nick Chubb looks anything close to what he did pre-injury, not only do you win the deal, you win it by a landslide because none of the guys that you gave up, you're probably losing sleep for. Even if you gave them up for a 4th-round pick, would you really lose sleep over losing the guys that you did?
Yeah, like, I mean, the guy that has the most opportunity to burn you in this trade is Mac Jones, because maybe he goes to a new team next year and he has like a Ryan Tannehill like career trajectory. Like that's the best case scenario for this guy. Like, why even trade for Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi? You're not going to use them in your lineup unless you're totally fucked at quarterback, right?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That was a sharp move there from Ryan, in my opinion.
Yeah. So let's move on to Chuck's trade. So this is a different team situation. Obviously, we have a team that lost Jonathan Taylor, an 11-1 contender. So he needs, production value. He goes out and he trades for Kyron Williams. He is 11-1 right now, and it is his 2nd round pick. So we're talking about at minimum, the 208 to 212, potentially a very, very late pick, given the fact that he's 11-1. And you give up Brian Robinson, who is a solid young back, but Kyron Williams, I would say by most people would be valued higher on the open market, regardless if you were contending or rebuilding. I think people would prefer Kyron Williams.
Go win your league. Go win your league. Brian Robinson, even if he was healthy, wouldn't be winning your league. I get it. Like, it's a 2nd-round pick in a very good class. It can net you someone, but guess what? What it can't net you is Kyron Williams' potential 20 points per game down the fantasy playoff stretch. You are a contending team. This is the perfect prime example of buying cheap points. I love this trade. I love it.
Yeah, there's not much you can get with Brian Robinson in a 2nd-round pick as far as needle moving assets. Like, you're not getting in Travis Etienne range for that. No. You're not getting into even Kenneth Walker range probably for that. So you might as well just go buy the productive piece. Kyron Williams, maybe this offseason you want to sell off on him because you don't think he's going to be there long term. You just absorb the production at the end of the year, maybe win your championship, and then maybe you can sell Kyron Williams for a late 1st rounder or Kyron in a 2nd for a late 1st rounder this coming year. Like, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be willing to pay something like that.
Even if you, worst case scenario, and you cash back out for that 2nd-round pick, I'm well sure that the cost of Brian Robinson is worth the price of pay, potentially winning the championship. I would give up a Brian
exactly. You
Robinson
might be
any
able to
day.
and that's a late second that you gave up. Maybe somebody's
Yes.
just giving you an early second straight up for Kyron Williams, which
Yeah.
might happen in the offseason too. So yeah, definitely a good move, good productive trade that you made there. Joey is the next trade that we're going to talk about
My
here.
God.
This is just absolutely stealing. Somebody actually commented
What?
on this trade and said, "Oh, it's a 10 team, so I actually don't really like the Bryce Young side because he's not a
What?
difference maker." Dog, 10 team super flex. You have to start 2 quarterbacks, or you should start 2 quarterbacks on any given week. And all you had to pay for Bryce Young, who was the 102 or 103 in rookie classes this past year, is a mid-second round pick and 2/3. This is a smash trade, an absolute smash trade.
Yeah, no, it's I don't understand how you're able to pull this off. Like, I understand that people are pessimistic about Bryce Young. They don't like how he's looked in the NFL. But at the same time, I understand he doesn't have the full physical tools that a Trevor Lawrence does, but did we not learn our lessons from Trevor Lawrence that sometimes
Tua
the
Tagovailoa, same
situation,
thing too. Like
like,
quarterbacks don't usually come into the NFL and do what CJ Stroud is doing. And that's why we value CJ Stroud appropriately, because the only quarterback we've really seen do that was like Justin Herbert in the last couple
yeah,
of years. Like quarterbacks
and
don't
back,
typically look that good their
yeah,
rookie seasons. They look like what Bryce Young looks like.
yeah,
And Bryce
no,
Young, for what it's worth, I watched that whole game yesterday against Tampa Bay. He played really well, and he showed you why he was the first overall pick, and he looked better than anything that we saw with Frank Reich as well. So if we get a decent coaching staff in here, there are already whispers that like maybe Ben Johnson is connected to this Carolina head coaching job, and you get a good scheme in this situation. Like if you put Bryce Young with D'Amico Ryans and Bobby Slowick, we'd be looking at a vastly different quarterback. Frank Reich made the Colts look like shit, and they're 7-5 without him. That should tell you everything that you need to know about Frank Reich's ability as a head coach.
I gotta ask you, man, is Adam Thielen cooked now? Like, what
Yeah,
the fuck happened?
absolutely, dude. Adam Thielen, the production was nice early in the season, but I knew it was a ticking time bomb, and it has been. He has been absolutely useless for the last like 5 games.
2 weeks. 2 weeks. So the last so Dallas and Chicago, he was good, but the last 2 weeks, 9 combined targets, 4 combined catches, 27 combined receiving yards. Like, it's tough because he's not having that stranglehold of targets that we saw earlier on in the year. And if a guy like Adam Thielen doesn't have 10, 11, 12 targets on a week, he is not the type of player that can perform you a wide receiver 2 or better slate, or a wide receiver 2 or better stretch if he's on 6, 7 targets.
And he was such a progress stopper for the offense too, because he was occupying the role that Jonathan Mingo should have been playing. And also the types of throws and targets he was getting was just like 6-yard out routes from Bryce Young, which is not going to help him learn anything about anything in the NFL. You need Bryce Young to throw downfield and potentially make some mistakes and see what he can get away with. And there was a couple throws yesterday. The throw to DJ Chark along the sideline, like it was like a 20-yard gain, was an awesome throw. He had a couple throws down the sideline to Jonathan Mingo as well that were really nice. So you're getting a guy that's actually throwing to guys that are going to be there, like Jonathan Mingo, in the next couple of years. Like, get their chemistry developed. Maybe if Jonathan Mingo turns it on down the stretch, you have a legitimate number 2 wide receiver for your offense, and you can go out and you could sign a T. Higgins or a Brandon Ayuk or trade for one of those guys, and then you have a tandem to work with to build around Bryce Young. Because not only is your first overall pick not developing, your early second round pick isn't developing either. And it's way better for you to just like force feed Jonathan Mingo and let him figure it out than it is to, throw to a fucking progress stopper like Adam Thielen.
Yeah, no, I agree there. So we can move on to the next trade here from Jay Michael. And that's going to be, he sent Tony Pollard, Khalil Shakir, and 2 2024 seconds for Jordan Love and Ramondre Stevenson. It's a Dynasty Superflex half PPR league. And he said he was out of quarterbacks with Rodgers, Burrow on IR, and Jackson on a bye. So for breaking this down, what would you say the cost is for Tony Pollard, or for Jordan Love from Tony Pollard alone? Like, you can make the argument right now, because of how Jordan Love has played, that it's probably Pollard, Shakir, and at least one of the seconds, right?
Yeah, I think that's probably about right. Given what Jordan Love has done so far, we're talking about a top 4 or 5 round startup pick, right? Jordan Love, he's got to be up there. Tony Pollard isn't getting anywhere near that range. He's probably like a 7th, 8th, 9th round startup pick at this point in time. And that's if he went back to Dallas. Like, we have no idea what's going to happen after this season. He might, sign with a worse team. He might go back to Dallas. We have no idea. So with Jordan Love, like he's worth probably Tony Pollard in both seconds. Maybe not quite that. Maybe it's Pollard, Shakir in one of the seconds, and then the other second goes for Stevenson, which I think I would prefer Ramondre Stevenson to a singular second round pick, straight up. So I think that's a pretty good trade for you. And I'm assuming you made this trade last week, but it's actually aged even better now that Jordan Love just had that game against Kansas City.
And real quick, the underrated part about this is you traded away a bunch of non-needle moving assets, in my opinion, for a potential piece that can get you up to one. Jordan Love, doesn't matter if you're higher or lower on him at this current point. You can add to Jordan Love and get up at quarterback, in my opinion. If you wanted to add Jordan Love plus a late first round pick, you could probably get up to, I don't even think that
Kyler Murray, Anthony Richardson.
Well, Kyler's going to be the one I said. I don't even think that, I think you can get Dak for cheaper than that, which is crazy to think about, right? So
I'm seeing people on Twitter today say that Jordan Love is better than Trevor Lawrence. So if you can get to Trevor Lawrence using Jordan Love in a second, or Jordan Love in a second and a third, or
even
something
a late
like that,
one, man,
that's a deal. I would give up Jordan Love and a mid one and a mid second to get to Trevor Lawrence. I would be willing to give that up, and I don't think people would expect you to pay that high of a price tag.
Yeah, I would easily be willing to give that up. And that's not any diss on Jordan Love. That just more so shows the market right now and where we view a guy like Trevor Lawrence in comparison. So, again, regardless, though, this is a great trade for you. And if you can leverage Jordan Love up and potentially even work higher, I think it's not only a great trade, I think it's a smash. So, we can move
probably
on
a little unlucky, though, that you got Ramondre Stevenson for Tony Pollard as far as the productive running back side of this trade, because Ramondre is now hurt and probably out for the rest of the fantasy season. And Tony Pollard's on a heater right now. He's actually been pretty good in recent weeks. So that's definitely not ideal for you. You fixed your quarterback problem, but you may have made a running back problem in that situation. But regardless, I think at face value was a good trade. This last trade, I think, is really, really interesting because context wise, I think it's really important where these picks are, first of all, and also the situation that Josh is in. So Josh says to me here, he says it's a 10-team Superflex league, half-point tight end premium. So obviously Dalton Kincaid is going to have a lot of value in a tight end premium format. He is 2-12. So his team is bad. He's tanking. He's going to have an early first-round pick this year. He still owns his own first-round pick, which we expect to be probably top 3 if he's 2-12, and then a mid-2024 first. But he traded away this guy back his own 2025 first. And what I'm assuming, given just how he made this trade, another late 2024 first, and let's say a mid-2025 or 2024 second.
So to break that down real quick, show it back. So that 2024 first you said is mid, and that 2025
No. He has a mid first still. So I'm assuming this was the latest of his first round picks. He didn't actually say that, but I'm assuming this is the latest of his first, because that's how I would negotiate the deal, at least.
Correct, but I am curious where.
Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that both this 2025 and 2024 first are expected to be mid to late.
If it's mid to late, I like the deal. If there's any chance that the 24 first is potentially 5, 6, 7, and that first round pick, again, the guy's acquiring back his first, and that has the potential to be the 102, 103, 104, that's the context that I need here. If they project earlier, I want the picks in your spot because I don't want to acquire production. If those are actual mid to late first round picks, I don't mind going out and potentially buying Chris Olave or Kincaid for the price that you got. So it really just depends the context of where those picks actually project, I think.
Yeah, I would say it also projects where is your team too. You could be 2-12, but in a 1-year punt. Right, like if you're 2-12 because you had a bunch of injuries, you had Anthony Richardson, you had a bunch of guys that are young building blocks, and you're just offloading, like you built up equity. Like let's say I guess he had 3 2024 first before this trade. He still has 2. He had an extra 2025 first, an extra couple 2025 first, and you're buying production because you're ready to compete next year. And he did say, like, I'm retooling for next year. So I'm assuming this is more of like a 1-year punt type of situation. And he built up the equity, built up the war chest. And now he's going and buying low on a Chris Olave, buying maybe high on Dalton Kincaid. But he knows in a half-point tight end premium, he might be the tight end 2 by the end of the season or something like that. I actually don't mind this trade. I didn't like it at first. I'm like, I don't like trading for assets when I'm in a rebuild and I'm 2-12 and I'm trying to tank for Caleb Williams. But at the same time, like if you've built up a war chest and, maybe you're still guaranteed a top 3 pick to begin with, like I'm fine with this trade.
Yeah, the context here is exactly where we project those picks. If that guy's stripping his team completely down and that 2025 first is probably projecting early to mid, then I change my stance. But if that only projects maybe mid now because he gave you Olave and Kincaid, then I don't mind making that move. Because again, he can control where his pick goes. If you don't want to give him his pick back, then he could just fuck you over and maybe get it up to the 108, the 109 if you wanted to. I really need to know the context of that guy's team.
Yeah, because that's, I mean, from the other guy's side of this trade, why would he be selling Olave and Kincaid unless he wasn't competing? Right?
Exactly.
Like he must be trying to tank or something like that. Maybe in 2025 he's not going to be tanking, and that's why he wanted his pick back or something like that. But regardless, we'll give you the benefit of the doubt and say that that's a mid to late pick. But if it's not a mid to late pick, that would 100% be, both of those would be problematic for the trade that you ended up making. And I would say this is probably a rookie mistake if that's what ended up happening, because you're not being patient and you're not, riding out your, when you build up a war chest of picks and you need a lot for your team, you don't really have the luxury of buying elite assets and giving up multiple picks for one guy. What you have to do instead is hit on your players and hit on your draft picks.
Yeah, I mean, like it all depends on the market value at the draft, because the reason why we don't like selling off picks at this point is because we know from an appreciation standpoint, if you just hold them up until April, guess what? Those picks are inherently going to go up 110, 120% of the value. So that's kind of why we say we typically don't like moving picks when we're a rebuilder. But if you find an advantageous spot like this, and let's just say those are mid to late picks, then this is the type of occasion where I don't mind doing it.
Yeah. It really all depends on the context of the trade and the context of the guy's team. So let's get off the dynasty topic here for a second, and let's talk about some of the big waiver ads for this week, because it is a pretty good week of waivers, given the fact that, I mean, you guys heard the injury spiel at the beginning of this video. There is a ton of players that are going to be out for a number of games, going to be out for the season potentially. So the top 5 waiver ads, real quick before I get into the actual names, there's a number of guys that are rostered in over 40% of Yahoo, Sleeper, and ESPN leagues combined. So they will not be on this top 5 list, but still make sure to check your waiver wire before Wednesday when everybody's waivers run to make sure that Antonio Gibson is not there, because Brian Robinson got hurt. He's probably going to be out for the next 2 or 3 games. He is available only in 55, or he is rostered in 55% of leagues right now. So he's probably not on your wire unless you're in a shallow league. But if he is available, definitely go pick him up. Keaton Mitchell also rostered in 43% of leagues, so he doesn't meet the threshold either, but he did slightly take over the Ravens backfield before the bye week, so we could see him potentially be like a solid option down the stretch. Noah Brown, 41% rostered right now. Tank Dell obviously out for the year. Noah Brown was pretty good in relief of some of those options. Nico Collins in particular, when he was out, he was quite good. And then Elijah Moore had 11 targets this week, and Amari Cooper had a concussion and might be out next week as well. And of course, we saw the Joe Flacco to Elijah Moore connection re-establish itself, because we had seen that previously in New York with those two guys, and we saw it again in Cleveland. And Elijah Moore looked pretty good too. He had a couple catches that were left on the field. He had, I think, like 80 yards or something like that. He could have went over 100.
4 for 82 on 12 targets, if I'm citing it correctly. And it makes me sick that the only way this guy gets targeted the way he should be is when Joe Flacco's at quarterback. I mean, like, it kind of felt such a Fugazi split in that first year, where it's like, oh, look, Joe Flacco, he's doing it with Joe Flacco. Just imagine if Zach Wilson progresses, what he can turn it into. And it's like, oh, up to this point, apparently Joe Flacco's the only one that can actually get this guy the football.
And like we say, like, he's never played with a good quarterback in his life. And like Deshaun Watson, in theory, should have been a good quarterback and wasn't really, at least for Elijah Moore's purposes. So pretty sad to see from Elijah, but maybe he can turn it on down the stretch. I would actually be really happy if he did, because I have a lot of Elijah Moore in best ball. And if I could somehow advance my Elijah Moore teams, that would be huge for the tournament.
Like, he wasn't a world beater by any means, but like Joe Flacco, you got to give him some flowers for just kind of coming off.
How many games would the Jets have won with him this year? Like, why was he not your first call when Aaron Rodgers got hurt? Like, why was he not your first call? Like, I don't understand why he was not the starting quarterback immediately of the New York Jets once Rodgers went down. Yeah, he knew the offense. He was an upgrade to Zach Wilson. At the very least, you could have, okay, we're going to see what Zach has now, but after 2 or 3 games of him not having it, you should have had Joe Flacco on the back burner.
Yeah, no, for sure. But we can move on to the waivers, and I'll let you start it off with, who is your number 5 of this week?
Yeah, my number 5 of this week is the only non-running back on this list in Jonathan Mingo, who I talked about with Bryce Young, had 10 targets this past week. If you're going to stash anybody that's not a running back at this point in the season, it should be a rookie wide receiver, a guy that, you know, his role kind of changed with Frank Reich out of the door. He kind of played a little bit more over the middle. He played a little bit more like short routes and stuff like that. He was running wind sprints for 11 straight games, it felt like, with Frank Reich out there. And pretty good peripherals this week. 38% of Bryce Young's targets went to Jonathan Mingo, which is a really, really high number for Mingo, by far his most on the season. I'm pretty sure that's almost double his career high so far in terms of a target share. I don't even know if he reached 19% in any of the other games. And he also set a season high 13 PPR points. He went 6 for 69 on 10 targets, like I said. So am I excited about Jonathan Mingo? Maybe not. Like, I don't think he might really turn into anything, but I do think he's worth a speculative add if you guys have Tyler Boyd on your bench, or if you have Robert Woods on your bench, or Devontae Parker on your bench, or something like that. Just stash him at the end of your bench. Maybe he turns into something down the stretch.
Yeah, so fun fact with Jonathan Mingo, in his last, or basically since the bye week for the most part, 99%, 96%, 98%, 95%, 92%, 96% of the Carolina snaps, seeing his role progression, 5+ targets in 5 of those 6 games. And we're really seeing that start to materialize into receiving yards. Again, 60 yards last week, 69 yards this week. If he keeps progressing as a player, again, we talked about all offseason, this is more of a raw player, but if he does get acclimated, if he does, learn the intricacies, the nuances of the NFL, he still has the talent as an after the catch playmaker to be able to add some juice to this offense. And we saw it on display this week. He was by far the number 1 wide receiver. We kind of mentioned it's come at the expense of Adam Thielen, where if you had Adam Thielen early in the year, you maybe thought he was a top 15 guy. At this point, if I asked you right now, Jonathan Mingo or Adam Thielen rest of the season, the answer is probably Jonathan Mingo.
Yeah, I mean, given the upside that he's showcased so far, I never thought Jonathan Mingo from like a dynasty perspective was going to come into the year and just like be the number 1 receiver for Carolina. But this is kind of the career trajectory I expected. Let's say, going into the year, I told you that Jonathan Mingo rose in dynasty value after his rookie season. I would have expected it to go something like this, right? Where he's not really that relevant early on in the season. After the bye week, he starts getting some targets. He starts accumulating some yards. And then maybe weeks 11 to 17 or something, we can pull like game splits where we're like, hey, Jonathan Mingo had 7 targets in 7 of his last 8 games or something like that. And now he's suddenly a top 35 dynasty wide receiver. Like, I could see something like that happening with Jonathan Mingo. And he has looked better as well in the last couple games.
Yes, and for reference, you mentioned he was your number 5. He's actually my number 3 this week. I really like the upside rest of the season for Jonathan Mingo, and just check some of my exposure on the redraft leagues I have on Sleeper, and I actually do have him in our FSE listener league. So really excited about how that team could potentially perform in the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, I sneakily actually had a decent amount of him in Best Ball Mania too. So
yeah,
or Best Ball Mania 4, not Best Ball Mania 2. But anyways, number 4 waiver ad for me on this list is Kenneth Gainwell. Like I said, we don't know what DeAndre Swift's injury is. We don't know how serious it is. We don't know if it's nothing. We don't know if it's something. But regardless, Kenneth Gainwell, who's rostered in 22% of leagues right now, is a highly sought after handcuff at this point in time, because we saw with the game script the way it went against San Francisco, Kenneth Gainwell has 6 targets in that game. He is a guy that can do it on all 3 downs. And if DeAndre Swift misses any time with this injury, or if he just hypothetically gets injured at some point, he is the type of guy that can win people leagues. So with Kenneth Gainwell, we're in the season now. The 6 bye week apocalypse is over. That was this week. And after this week, I did the video earlier last week where I talked about the mustache players for the fantasy playoffs. Kenneth Gainwell was very high on that list because he plays for a great team. He has a 3-down skill set. And if DeAndre Swift, who's often injured and might be right now, gets hurt for an extended period of time, Kenneth Gainwell can be a league winner.
Yeah, no, I agree. He's actually my number 5 on this list, so we're pretty much on the same page there. The efficiency hasn't really been there, but at the same time, you're trusting the process there, the situation that he has, the offensive line, the implied points on a week-to-week basis for the Eagles, where he doesn't have to be the most efficient player in the world to score fantasy points in this offense. So I do think, like you kind of said, if DeAndre Swift were to miss any time, I don't think it's a serious injury, but I still think even the implied handcuff value that Kenneth Gainwell brings, that's why we roster guys like Rico Dowdle. That's why we rostered guys like Zach Charbonnet before Kenneth Walker got hurt. You want access to offenses that can put up points. And like we know with the Philadelphia Eagles, this is a one-off performance. They're typically not going to score 19 points on every single team.
Yeah, exactly. And real quick, back to Jonathan Mingo for 1 second. His last 2 games, 1.76 yards per route run and 2.16 yards per route run. Both of those highest marks on the season. So he is definitely the type of guy that's kind of turning things around, as we talked about. So my number 3 waiver addition on the week was my number 1 last week. So when I talked about the waivers last week, Roschon Johnson was my number 1. Obviously, he didn't play this past week. He is 26% rostered, and that number might even be a little bit lower in your league because the Bears bye week. Roschon Johnson was my highest priority waiver target because he played a season high 75% of the snaps with Khalil Herbert healthy on week 12's Monday Night Football game. And Deontay Foreman was out for that game, so we don't know how much we can take away from it. But if Deontay Foreman is back, or if Deontay Foreman isn't back, Roschon Johnson could actually be a really, really good option down the stretch this year. Usually, when you see a rookie flash that kind of upside, 75% of the snaps after not commanding more than like 30% all year, it's usually a good bet to say maybe this trend will continue.
Yeah, and now built in here for the record, Roschon Johnson is actually my number 4 pickup of the week. Built in here, like you said, the elite usage that we saw, absolutely nice to see. Obviously, Deontay Foreman coming back could have some wrinkles, but we typically see rookies post bye week command more work, especially if they started out slow. They are able to, get more acclimated to the offense. We usually see that post bye week. The Bears bye week is coming up right this week. Actually, their week.
They were on bye this week. They were on bye this week. So in week 12, he had the 75% of the snaps, 100% of long down and distance, 14% target share, 75% of the short down and distance. Khalil Herbert was playing in that game, and he was the lead back coming into the year. And then now we have the bye week where they probably go back and watch the film. They see what Roschon did, and maybe he's their lead back going forward.
Correction, brain fumble, by the way. I'm assuming that he would have just played, but like you kind of said, exactly. He had the bye week this week. That's more so projection week 14 on. So my fault, slip up a little bit, but regardless, same type of application applies there. He showed the coaching staff what he was able to do. They have the bye week this week. We could potentially see him still be the lead back going up against Detroit this upcoming week. So really excited to see that for Roschon Johnson's perspective. So basically the 3 to 5 for me is all taken up with Mingo, Roschon, and Kenneth Gainwell. I think we have the same 2, but I want to see what your order of the top 2 actually is.
I have Tajay Spears at number 2. The reason I have Spears at number 2 and Zeke at number 1 is because Spears is probably only a 1-game handcuff, 1-game absence. And again, in that video last week, I talked about mustache players for the fantasy playoffs. Tajay Spears ranked very highly on that list for a reason. Number 1, he's a top 20 graded running back and receiver at the running back position. He's been very good this year. He's been elusive. He's been efficient. He's averaging over 5 yards a carry. Derrick Henry suffered a concussion in week 13, so it doesn't look like he's going to miss extended time, but he could miss this week. He has a 33% chance of playing. That's what the fantasy doctors always cite, is when you suffer a concussion one week, your chances of playing the next week are 33%. So if Tajay Spears is on your waiver wire and you need a win to secure a bye, or you need a win to get into the playoffs, or you need a win to avoid doing your league punishment or whatever, then definitely go out and put some serious cash, whatever you got left on your fab budget, on Tajay Spears, because he's going to be a great option this week if Derrick Henry is out. And worst case scenario, he's a great stash for the playoffs.
100%. With Tajay Spears, obviously, if you get the utility of him being the starter this week, that's a big time plus. But even just, you kind of mentioned like the high valued handcuffs, Tajay Spears needs to be talked about in that realm. Obviously, we have the opportunity where if Derrick Henry is out, you get that utility. But Tajay Spears on the year, 4.98 yards per carry, 46 targets commanded in this offense. If he is able to see that expanded role like we saw this past week with Henry getting banged up, 14.05 PPR points, 22 opportunities with 6 targets. That's not only a usable role, that's an RB1 level workload.
Yeah, and we have the Dolphins this week who don't really scare you, and that could be a high, pass game script for Tajay Spears if he's the starter. The Texans the week after, not a run defense that scares you. The Seahawks the week after, not a run defense that scares you. And the Texans again in the fantasy playoff, not a run defense that scares you. So, I mean, I've talked about it in the playoff videos with Derrick Henry, how good his playoff schedule is. That would also then apply to Tajay Spears if Henry were out for a significant period of time. He's probably only going to be out 1 game, if that, but you still want to hold on to Tajay Spears after you pick him up this week, because he is an elite upside handcuff to roster for the rest of the fantasy playoffs in case you do get another game out of him where he is the starting running back. So like I said, my number 1 on the week is Ezekiel Elliott. The reason being is because number 1, we know he can handle a workload. We've seen it for a number of years. And number 2, Ramondre Stevenson's probably going to IR, and he's probably going to be out for the rest of the fantasy season.
Yeah, so the reason why we have Ezekiel Elliott at the top, we mentioned, the high implied value of Tajay Spears if Derrick Henry were to miss. We already know Ramondre is missing. And I understand you can make the argument that a guy like Tajay Spears could have more upside if Derrick Henry were to miss extended time. But with Ezekiel Elliott, you can pencil him in as an RB2 in fantasy football. Yes, it might only be a low in RB2 because he's not the most efficient player and he plays on a shit offense. But this past week, 22 opportunities, 92 yards from scrimmage, and he's going to have touchdown equity on this offense. Now, the amount of times they may get inside the 5, inside the 10-yard line, that really remains to be seen. But well in hand, if the Patriots are able to drive inside a team's 5-yard line, Ezekiel Elliott is getting the ball 2+ times.
Yeah, and I mean, he had a 21% target share this past week with Ramondre playing in the game for the most part, and he got mainly all of the long down and distance and 2-minute drill snaps. So the thing that I love about Zeke as a waiver ad this week is like you can make the concessions that he's on a terrible offense and it's probably not going to score very much, but he's going to be a 3-down workhorse
Oh
with
yeah.
Ramondre Stevenson. He's literally going to get like a 75-80% snap share. So I don't care what team you're playing for. Like if you have that type of workload, you're going to be a high end RB2 probably, not even just a low end RB2. Like that is high end RB2 type of workload. So, and again, going back to the video I did last week, I talked about Ezekiel Elliott in the tier 2 of handcuffs, where if the starter goes down, what are we labeling the backup as? With Tajay Spears, he's an RB1 without Derrick Henry. But with Ezekiel Elliott, he's a high-end RB2 without Ramondre Stevenson, given the offense that he plays in. But the workload, particularly, of all the backup running backs in the league, one of the guys I feel most confident in their ability to handle a workload is Ezekiel Elliott.
And it's funny because you would have assumed coming into the year, like, oh, Ramondre's efficiency numbers are going to be so much higher than Zeke's. And for what it's worth, that's mostly a byproduct of the fact that Ramondre's been more efficient lately, suffered, the injury earlier in the season, was very inefficient like the first 5 or so games. But if you're to compare their seasonal output, 3.97 yards per carry for Ramondre Stevenson, 3.83 yards per carry from Ezekiel Elliott, 6.42 yards per reception, 4.97 yards per target for Zeke. In terms of Ramondre Stevenson, 4.67 and 6.26. They're virtually very similar from an efficiency standpoint in this offense. We kind of know what it's going to be. It's going to be 3.7, 3.8 yards per carry. He's going to get, 4 or 5 targets per game. And that alone, I mean, we saw Ramondre Stevenson, despite fighting for carries, fighting for, opportunities in this backfield with Ezekiel Elliott, he was the RB20 in fantasy. Like, Ezekiel Elliott doesn't have to do much to be a top 24 overall running back is basically the premise of this argument.
Well, and I said it last week on the running back tier list video. Ramondre Stevenson, since week 6, is the RB6 in fantasy. Like, he was legitimately giving you borderline RB1 production for a number of games there. So if Zeke is going to get his workload, he's the 35th highest graded running back on PFF right now out of 61. So he's been about exactly league average in the NFL. He is graded similarly to Najee Harris, Jonathan Taylor, and Josh Jacobs.
What was Ramondre's grade? I'm very curious about that.
Ramondre's grade was a 17th, so he was higher. Okay. It was really bad for a while, but he has been playing better as of lately, which is why his fantasy production has obviously gone up a ton. So yeah, Ezekiel Elliott, if he's available on your waiver wire, he is absolutely the type of guy that you can use in the rest of the season. And we Brody and a couple other people are saying that Derrick Henry is not in the concussion protocol. Again, Tajay Spears, if we hear before Wednesday that Derrick Henry's not in danger of missing the next game, then don't drop all of your fab on him, and he probably becomes like the 4th best waiver ad this week. But if Derrick Henry is in the concussion protocol, then he is 100% drop every last dime of fab that you have on him. Again, this is why this is early waiver discussion. It's Monday. We still have another day before we know all this information. And Tajay Spears, regardless, is a good stash because Derrick Henry is older and he could wear down the rest of the season. We actually do have another super here from Bryce as well.
Yeah, Bryce says here, we're pretty much done with the waiver segment, so we'll get through a couple questions and then wrap this up within the next 5 to 10 minutes. But Bryce asks here, trade Rice and Elijah Moore for Puka, 10-team, 1 quarterback, PPR, 3 wide receivers, 2 flexes. My other wide receivers are ARSB, Ayuk, Godwin, Wilson, Tillman, Bobo, Shakir, Flowers, Palmer. Running backs are Cook, Jacobs, Williams, and Warren. I'm easily giving this up for Puka Nacua. I understand Rashid Rice has his own upside and his own perspective. I understand that Elijah Moore is coming off a big game, but I think Puka Nacua personally has really cemented himself as a top 15 dynasty wide receiver. He came back from injury this past week, was able to still produce 136 yards from scrimmage, and as long as Matthew Stafford is there, I don't think anything's going to not continue in that regard.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a redraft or a dynasty trade, but in either case, it's very easily Puka Nacua.
Yeah, no, completely agree.
All right. So looking through all the other questions, a lot of you guys talking about, the whole Derrick Henry situation. Again, we'll keep monitoring that situation. We'll make sure we know what's going on. We also see a question here from Alex that I think is interesting. He says, in the offseason, I'm trying to move up in my Superflex Dynasty draft. What could I get for Bryce Young? My team is horrible. My quarterbacks right now are Bryce, Aaron Rodgers, Anthony Richardson, and Gardner Minshew. I honestly don't think you should sell Bryce Young this offseason because I think he will be vastly undervalued and you won't get exactly what you're looking for him. So for me, I would say you should probably just hold Bryce Young and see kind of what he develops into. So I just saw this. Is the guy on the right single? No, I actually live with my girlfriend, so I am
There you
not
go.
single.
Oh, tell him. Tell him.
Can you all do tight end ranks next season? I mean, if you're
do.
talking, let's just do it off the cuff right now. What are the redraft tight end rankings? I don't know if that's what you're
what he
talking
means.
about. We have Dynasty tight end rankings available on Flock Fantasy if you're interested in that. But if we're just going off the cuff, what are the redraft tight end rankings next year? Who's tight end one? Is it still Kelsey if he's playing?
I mean, as of the information we know now, yes. If there's a possibility where he continues to look worse and worse down the stretch, and guys like Laporta, Hawkinson, all produce in their own right, I think that's an open discussion. It's really tough to project it going into next season because there's so much that can unfold, especially for these older players. For example, again, knock on wood, what if McCaffrey gets hurt and has, bad production down the stretch? That's going to affect the running back landscape because I don't know what would happen at running back. I think that really applies to tight end as well. If I had to project it moving forward as of what we know right now, Kelsey's got to be the number one. I think then number two comes in with a tier, to be honest. Is Andrews going to be fully healthy? He would be in the mix. Hawkinson, Laporta, Kincaid, George Kittle. This is the most wide open race for tight end two that I've probably seen in 5+ years.
I honestly think tight end one would be a full tier of all of those players, to be honest. That's the way I would kind of look at it. And then after those guys, you're probably getting into like your Pat Freiermuth, Dallas Goedert, Jake Ferguson, potentially Cole Kmet, potentially David Njoku type of guys. Like there'd be a number of dudes in that range. So that's kind of like our rough top 12.
The other one that might just be tight end one, if what we're seeing so far ends up keeping on materializing, man, we might have to start throwing Trey McBride in that discussion. And we talked about him actually as a dynasty sell this past week, which I think is still sound process. But at the same time, it's like, if he keeps going out and doing what he's doing, he will be worth that elite tight end price tag that we kind of said was a little bit iffy.
Yeah, and we'll have to figure out what the hell to do with Kyle Pitts as well next year. I'm sure he'll be like tight end 12 or 8 in ADP, somewhere around there. People will talk themselves into Kyle Pitts again, including probably both of us, depending on the situation there. So Ryan actually asked a question here. He says, Dynasty, send Ramondre and Ferguson for Diggs.
Yes.
Yeah, easily, in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Again, I like what Jake Ferguson's been doing in this offense, and I do think he's going to be an integral part moving forward. He's already better than Dalton Schultz, but at the same time, Stephon Diggs is a top 5 wide receiver rest of season and going into next season. So if you're trying to contend, this is a smash deal, and you're not giving up too much liquidity to be able to do it.
Yeah. So we did get a report, by the way, that Derrick Henry is not in the concussion protocol, putting him on track to play this week. Regardless, I still think Tajay Spears is a top 5 waiver ad, even as a stash, as like the 4th best option. I think I would probably just switch my order then from Roshan would become my number 2, Kenneth Gainwell would become my number 3, and then Tajay Spears would probably be number 4 or 5, depending on what you think of Mingo. Jared says, how much is it to join Flock? It is $16 a month with promo code FSE for a Mother Flocker tier subscription, and $13 a month, I believe, with promo code FSE for a Flocker tier subscription. And it is, I think, $90 for the whole year, which would save you 6 months of a monthly subscription for a Mother Flocker tier subscription with promo code FSE. And if you sign up for a full year, then you get a video consult with one of us to talk about whatever you want to talk about. Plus, I mean, from now until next year, the amount of stuff that will be added on Flock, I promise you guys will blow your minds. We already have a dynasty and a redraft trade calculator. We're going to be having a lot of cool, start sit tools and stuff, more so for the next redraft season. And in the off season this year, we're coming up, prospect models and a bunch of shit that we're going to be bringing to the dynasty off season for Flock Fantasy. And I'm really excited for it. So I think the best value is signing up for the year, because you get the 6 months for free. Plus the site will be vastly different from what you signed up for when you signed up for it. So most of the content, the bonus content that we put out, we have 2 Flock exclusive videos out right now. Dynasty trade targets at every position. For those of you guys that are looking to make some trades at the end of this year. And then also we have a dynasty trade strategy for rebuilders, for house money teams, and for contenders right now at this point in the season, when we're talking like some teams are out of it, some teams are into it, all that stuff. And yes, the promo code is FSE, and you have to use our promo code because we do not get credit unless you use our promo code, and it gets you 30% off, and it gets you first priority on Dynasty decisions. And like I said, you'll also get in our Discord, which has private channels. You can add us as friends on there and get questions answered whenever you want. So if that interests you guys, of course, check that down below in the link in the description.
Yeah, you summed it up perfectly. And we got a lot of stuff coming behind the scenes. Like, you guys do not realize how much the Dynasty landscape is going to change with how much is actually getting implemented to the site. Can't really, unveil too much, but
well, I'll unveil some of it right now, because our bonus episode every single week from January to March will probably be us breaking down film of a prospect. So if you want to watch us like literally break down film on these prospects, we are going, because we can't do that on YouTube, right? We would get taken off YouTube for doing that. But because it's on the site, we can, put it as an unlisted video or whatever and break down film and all that kind of stuff. When is the Danny forehead reveal for the Mother Flocker tier? He's going to do that on OnlyFans, actually. So we're going to need to make Danny's OnlyFans this offseason as well.
I might have to just start auctioning off sweaty bandanas.
Yeah, that'd be disgusting. My Dynasty team I thought was out, but my team is cooking at 4 first next year. Yeah, you definitely, if you have a lot of draft picks, I mean, you're going to want to keep it tapped. You also have all of the other content from the other creators. So I don't know what the hell they're doing, but they probably have a lot of cool stuff planned as well.
Yeah,
only
for sure.
Fanny. But yeah, Brody says, "Oh, I'll be covered then." Anyways, that is the end of the stream. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure to stick around for tonight's stream. We're going to be going live before the Monday night game, and then tomorrow we'll have you covered with waivers and all that good stuff. Let us know if you guys have any ideas you want to see throughout the rest of the season. We got some open, Wednesday slots because there's no trade targets, obviously, at this point in the year. So we have some flexibility with what we want to do from like a 2024 prospect angle or, whatever you guys want to talk about. We could do another Dynasty Decisions this week. We're kind of wide open. So anyways, if you enjoyed, like the stream, subscribe if you're new around here. Peace out. We'll talk to you soon.